Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's Redington virtual session. The topic for today's session is Introduction to VMware Networking Portfolio. The session will be presented by Sriram. During the session, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A tab on the left, and they'll be answered at the end of the session. At the end of the session, we also have a small quiz organized. So kindly stay tuned to participate. Sriram, over to you.
Thanks, Tanika. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining today's session. Today, I wanted to discuss SD-WAN, but before that, I wanted to give you an overview of, where VMware is in terms of its networking portfolio and why the different components of VMware networking is important today. So, well, every problem or every challenge that we have, we wanted to see how today's IT landscape is. Now, one of the things that is most important for today's customers is going to be the fact that everything is dependent on the application. The application is the revenue stream for majority of organizations, or at least purpose, when it comes to government. And in such scenario, and in the traditional sense of the enterprise, this was also in terms of productivity for employees as well. So given that, if we look at the last 10 years or so, the application has evolved quite a lot. We started off with a monolithic client-server architecture, where it was just an app that was being published, accessed by users. And as the complexity of the apps, as well as the content of the apps has grown since, and the number of users have grown since, we have seen the tiered architecture for applications, which is what predominantly is used today by most organizations. A tiered approach is where we are able to separate the systems into the functions like database, the app, the systems themselves, and of course for a lot of larger enterprises and some of the very new born in the cloud startups, they have gone to a more sophisticated service-oriented architecture, which is what we call microservices. So when we look at that, for example, the containers. So when we look at the kind of evolution the application has had, unfortunately, the network hasn't really changed, or at least it hasn't kept pace with this kind of evolution the application has had. So that brings us to the problem in the networking space. Now, on the LAN side, things have changed. We have introduced SDN, we have introduced network virtualization. There is some level of orchestration that is available, but it is those parts of the network that has evolved. For example, SD-WAN is such a part. The reason for SD-WAN, or the business case for SD-WAN, is from the fact that the WAN really didn't evolve even after all these years. The technologies that is being used in the WAN, for example, is a few years old. The BGP has existed in the WAN forever. And while some innovations have happened around BGP, it hasn't really translated to the kind of application-centric design and architecture that we want. We have had MPLS. It's a complicated technology by itself, and really doesn't serve the purpose of an elastic business. So we looked at the three things that we thought were hurting the evolution of networks, and the first one is that it is increasingly complex and heterogeneous, and there are multiple vendors who are contributing to the IT enterprise networks, and they all have a varied approach, and these are built on hardware-based systems, which can be hard to migrate away from, or to pivot, to change a strategy, or to troubleshoot. The second part is that this traditional way of networking has become increasingly complex in a way that they have become inflexible. That if we want to change an architecture, the pace of that change is going to be a few years and not a few months, and especially not a few days that businesses demand today. And the final part is that the networking and security teams, they are not able to see or triage the issues, or in many cases, a lot of teams say that the lack of visibility means that they duplicate their efforts between themselves, and especially in the case of WAN, the network and security teams have overlapping functions. The firewall acts as a network edge, which is which does multiple things. It's that complexity that prevents them from being productive and operationally agile. That is the reason why VMware has taken a software-defined approach. It's a software first, and the best part about having a software-defined approach is the fact that the designs and architectures that we have, that we'll implement, will be extremely agile. It will be very flexible. It can scale up and down. It can cater to elastic demand of resources and networks, which means that this is much more suited to the kind of application delivery, as well as and also service delivery for enterprises. So in order to achieve that, VMware has taken a path where they have seen the gaps in layer 2 to layer 7 networking and security. And in the networking portfolio, apart from NSX, which contributes to SDN and network virtualization, they have also plugged some gaps. For example, with the advanced load balancer AVI networks, we are solving a huge problem when it comes to application delivery. And with SD-WAN, we are able to bring the WAN to layer 7 as well. The second point is that software-defined solution that runs everywhere, which literally means that VMware's vision of build, manage, run, connect, and protect is now getting completed by SD-WAN, which means that we are now able to go and talk to customers and say, it really doesn't matter what you have. It doesn't really matter where you plan to go with your IT. We have the products and components to complement all that. We have the products and services that the enterprises need to achieve whatever the goals are. Which means that, and this is a huge statement to make. The reason being, if you are talking to an IT manager, we are able to provide the IT managers with a kind of flexibility. So when they talk to their bosses, when they talk to the CIOs, they are able to go and make statements such as, we can go from completely on-prem to cloud in about 3 months, and we do not need significant investments. We can reuse the existing infrastructure and then just move to cloud. Now, we can do that with VMware, not only in the compute and storage space, we can also do that with networks as well. And of course, the final part of it is automation. And automation is a buzzword used by a lot of vendors all the time. But at VMware, automation is taken extremely seriously because of the fact that the landscape for automation and the opportunities for automation have changed drastically since last 10 years or so. The reason being, maybe 10 or 5 years ago, automation was seen as a luxury component of IT. A lot of things was done manually, and that was okay. And more importantly, the smaller enterprises, they really didn't need that kind of automation. But that has changed because of the fact that a lot of startups today, small organizations, they're born in the cloud. And if we have assets in the cloud, it is extremely important that we have automation. Because in the cloud, nothing works manually. We need to have those APIs. We need those machines to communicate with each other. And because of this, automation is no longer a luxury. It's a necessity for all enterprises. And I think this is the part that really brings it all together, when it comes to VMware networking. So this is the overall portfolio of VMware networking. And today, specifically, we are going to be looking at the SD-WAN and how to sell SD-WAN to our customers. So we have mentioned that Velocloud SD-WAN, which is now part of VMware, is a cloud-delivered SD-WAN. And there is a number of reasons why we call it cloud-delivered SD-WAN. And if you have noticed, recently HPE has announced the intent to acquire Silver Peak, which is also in the SD-WAN space. But I want to highlight the fact that Velocloud is an SD-WAN solution like no other. And the reason being, it is truly delivered from the cloud. For example, the key components of the Velocloud SD-WAN is the gateways that Velocloud and its partners maintain in all the major ISP POPs. And of course, next to all the SaaS providers' data center. Now, these are already deployed and maintained by Velocloud, which means that when customers choose to have Velocloud SD-WAN, they get the benefit of having these gateways already deployed, and that is included as part of the solution. Now, this brings an enormous amount of benefits for the customers because of the fact that we are bringing the entirety of all workloads on the same overlay, and we are bringing that closer to the users and their customers, and we can do that in a few clicks instead of waiting for weeks of deployment of expensive technology like MPLS. So here's the agenda. I'm going to go through this quickly, and we will hope to finish about 5 minutes from time, and after that we'll have a quiz quickly to discuss the components of today's webinar. In terms of the company, Velocloud started in 2014, relatively new. However, within 3 years, it has made huge strides in terms of customers and technology. It was acquired by VMware in 2017. As of now, VMware has more than 2,000 customers of its own in the SD-WAN space, and a lot more through the SPs and managed services partners. And there are more than 100,000 sites today that are powered by Velocloud SD-WAN, as we call it, the edge sites. And if you see on the right side, a lot of major enterprises are already on this technology across the world. And in fact, we have customers here in the region as well. For example, Majid Al Futtaim Retail, Carrefour in the region, across the Gulf, all their locations are powered by Velocloud SD-WAN. They are a customer of ours. And another point to note is the ecosystem. Now we are talking about the WAN edge, and we are talking about the WAN, which means that there are a lot of cloud delivered services that we have today. There are a lot of security services that we may have to integrate with, and this is where I think Velocloud really stands out because as you can see, all the major security vendors are technology partners for Velocloud, and we can take their solutions which are delivered from the cloud and insert it directly with just a few clicks instead of redoing all those policies in the WAN. In terms of market share, Velocloud SD-WAN is far ahead of its competition. In fact, this is from 2017, but Cisco's market share has since dropped, gained predominantly by Velocloud and a little bit by Silver Peak as well. Now, this I want to spend a few minutes on, and also just to give you the overview of how mature the Velocloud SD-WAN technology is. So, like I mentioned in the last two slides, this is not a new technology. This is not something that is untested. This is already powering a lot of business critical applications and customers, and that is reflected in this in the Gartner's Magic Quadrant for WAN Edge as well. Now, Gartner only started this process in 2018. So 2018 was the first time SD-WAN or WAN Edge was considered as its own technology platform to be evaluated by Gartner. And as you can see, in the 2018, we have VMware, Cisco, and Silver Peak in the leaders quadrant. Of course, Cisco is there by the acquisition of Viptela. VMware is there because of Velocloud. And if you see in 2019, Cisco has kind of dropped out, and that's predominantly because of the fact that a lot of claims that were made by Cisco in terms of integrating Viptela with the existing ISR install base turned out to be not true. It didn't really work out. In fact, the ISRs that are already deployed either needed a forklift upgrade or expensive additions to make them work with Viptela. So some of those didn't really pan out for customers. And if you see 2019, VMware is kind of pulling ahead from all the other vendors in the leaders quadrant, predominantly because of the fact that we keep adding features, and this VMware SD-WAN, Velocloud SD-WAN is delivered as a subscription. And because of this, we are able to introduce these features, while we continue to evolve and making these features available as soon as possible to customers once they are ready. Now, I also want to point out that you can see some of the other players in the market, like we have Fortinet, we have Juniper Networks, and some of the other vendors. The reason why you see them either as niche players or challengers and not in the leaders quadrant is because majority of the solutions depend on firewall, and the fact that they have to depend on a firewall edge device puts a lot of limitations on how the SD-WAN pans out. And of course, the fact that they have no cloud gateways, so they can't really reap the benefits of the SD-WAN. And also on the other side, these firewall devices work based on flows of traffic and not on a per packet basis, which means that they have limitations in terms of aggregating the bandwidth. And that is the reason why you will see that throughout the material data sheets or any material that you see about Velocloud, we don't use words like failover, because we are talking about aggregating the bandwidth. We do not leave bandwidth capacity unutilized if there is a requirement, unlike the rest of the vendors, and that limits their ability to be in the leaders quadrant of Gartner. So I want to highlight the problems of the traditional way of network design and why it is no longer possible, no longer viable. So I come from a traditional networking world. I was working on Juniper, Fortinet, Palo Alto, Cisco designs when it came to the distributed enterprise, right? And if you see that the design, it has been based on the hub and spoke, which has existed for as long as I can remember. And this was fine because in the past, all the services and applications are delivered from the DC or the HQ, and all the branches kind of communicate with the legacy data centers. And typically, what we will do is we'll provision an MPLS link or a private link between the data center and the branch, and we'll have a backup using a cheaper connection, and we will fall back to usually what we see is an IPsec VPN in case the primary link fails. Now the problem with this is that things have changed, because we now have the cloud to deal with. And the cloud comes in different flavors as well. For example, it could be infrastructure as a service like AWS or Azure, and it could be SaaS like Office 365 or Workday or SAP. Now with AWS and Azure, we have some control over the infrastructure. What it means is that we can maybe put an edge device, a virtual appliance in AWS or Azure or Google Cloud, and have that connected to the rest of the site. In SaaS, we do not have that possibility, and this poses a huge problem for those workloads. And another challenge in the cloud is also the fact that in the past, the branches only needed to communicate with the DC. Now they also have to communicate with AWS and Azure or cloud delivered workloads. Now, the way the cloud is architected is that when you send traffic to the cloud, it's free. But when you want the traffic to come out of the cloud, that costs money because we'll be utilizing their internet bandwidth. Now, AWS has a solution called Direct Connect, which is a service by which they will establish a tunnel between the AWS workload and one of the locations. Typically, this will be the DC. Now, when we look at the traditional way of networking, like we mentioned before, when these applications are delivered from the cloud, typically a user in the branch will have the traffic sent to the DC first, and then it will go to the cloud, and then it will come back to the DC and back to the user. So there is a huge detour that the traffic needs to take. This will affect performance. In fact, we had a customer who complained exactly of this after they started moving their workloads to AWS, and we did a POC with them to show them how Velocloud can solve this problem. Now, this is what has changed, and this is the reason why we need SD-WAN. The second part of this is that, so like I mentioned, the first point here is that 30 to 50% of traffic, is now, shifting to the cloud, and this is changing the way we design WAN. And the second part, and especially relevant at this time because of the pandemic, which has dominated majority of this year, is the fact that a lot of interactive voice and video traffic that we see, again, which are all delivered from SaaS, delivered as SaaS. And if you look at the major players today, Microsoft Teams, WebEx, as well as with Zoom, they're all delivered from they're all delivered as SaaS services with very few exceptions. And of course, like I mentioned, VoIP, interactive voice, has increased, and a lot of retail customers, for example, they have rich media in their applications that the consumers use. Now, this may not be true for all Gulf countries, but in some Gulf countries, this is still happening. And like I mentioned, this is not really a reflection of how the services are. Sometimes the internet cannot be as fast as the LAN, right? And that is the truth. And because of this, when we look at how the users interact with the past architectures of where everything was delivered from the DC, and when it moves to the cloud, it becomes slow. So we need to solve this issue as well. Now, the last part is that the internet dependency is not going away, especially for customers who have a number of locations. It is almost impossible to have a LAN-like connectivity between the locations, especially if they are located in multiple countries, right? For example, in the case of MAFCAL 4, they operate across all countries in the region, as far away as Pakistan to Egypt, and this creates a unique problem for them. So across all these locations, if they want to have an MPLS connectivity, number one, it is going to be really expensive. Number two, all these MPLS links will take weeks, if not months, to provision. And combining these two together, we need to look at an option where we are able to provide customers with better solution than that. We need to leverage the internet better to provide them these additional services. The third part is that the redundancy of internet links and having an active and backup link is not going to solve a lot of problems that the enterprises face today when it comes to the internet. Which means that we need to bundle everything together. If we have 5 links at a particular site, the utilization of bandwidth should be a combination of all 5 links. It cannot be 2 or 3. In the traditional world, in the traditional network design, utilizing all the 5 links will depend on layer 3, which has its own problems because layer 3 is slow. We cannot use that to we cannot map that to the application itself. We cannot map that to the applications themselves, and that creates a huge gap. And that's the reason why we have Velocloud SD-WAN. So I want to quickly look at what it's capable of. What is it that we offer the customers in terms of WAN with Velocloud. The first thing is we do want to say bring your own bandwidth. Now, if you look at the rest of the services that VMware offers, this is the part where we are commoditizing the hardware. And in the case of the WAN, the hardware is the bandwidth, which is the links underneath. And we are going to tell our customers, it doesn't matter what types of connectivity you have. It could be MPLS, it could be lease lines, it could be broadband, it could be 3G, it could be 4G. All we look at is bandwidth. The second part is that, like I mentioned before, unlike the other vendors, we are not going to talk about failovers. We are going to talk about aggregation, which means that if we have 2 links, let's say if we have an MPLS link, which is about, say, 50 Mbps, and we have 2 other broadband links, 200 Mbps each, we will look at that as, 450 Mbps bandwidth, and that's it. And we are not going to see whether we utilize we are not going to look at whether we are going to fail over from the reliable MPLS, because that is no longer required. We are abstracting that part of the WAN. The second part is going to be that, or the third part is that we need to understand when an internet link is not performing at 100%. Now, this is why we don't mention failovers, because failovers are very old school now when it comes to the WAN. The more important issue with WAN is going to be that through that circuit, is it going to drop packets? Is it going if we send 100 packets, is it going to it usually never happens that we use an internet line and we lose all the packets. I mean, if that happens, the ISPs will scramble and make sure their services are up. So that's not the major concerns that the enterprises have, because the redundant path options for those scenarios will already be done by ISPs. Now, one of the things that the ISPs will not be able to do is when we send 100 packets, is that circuit going to drop 10 packets? Then we need to know. That is what we call a brownout, because there's not a blackout, it's just parts of that circuit which misbehaves. And when that happens, we need to send traffic through another link, or we need to find additional options. And let's say if that happens, let's say if there is a problem, if a particular internet line is dropping packets, then we need to be able to remediate that situation. Now, let's say that one site has two links and both of them are misbehaving. Now, Velocloud is, the system is intelligent enough to take steps to mitigate that. For example, one of the things that it does is that it will sequence all the traffic that is going, and sometimes when the brownout is really bad, it will send multiple copies of the same packet so that it has a higher chance of arriving at the destination. Now, the fifth and sixth part, they go hand in hand. This is something that I mentioned before. We need to stop having dependencies on layer 3 when we decide how the traffic is being routed. So with Velocloud, one of the things that I really like about the Velocloud solution is the fact that it looks at this source application, the application which created that traffic, and it is able to match that to a business policy that we already have and route the traffic accordingly, which means that we'll no longer talk about quality of service. We don't need to make complicated calculations. We don't need the diff serve code points anymore. Instead, what we are going to do is we are going to define that, hey, this particular application is going to be extremely important, and this needs, and this is also sensitive to time and packet loss. To give you an example, one of the things that Velocloud can do is that the deep application recognition, it is DAR. It is able to recognize different types of traffic. Like if we look at Office 365, for example, now all the traffic that goes between a particular site and Office 365 may not be the same profile. For example, if it is Teams traffic, we know that Teams traffic is both important, it's business critical, as well as it is not fault tolerant. This is real-time voice and video traffic. They need to be treated differently from, say, Outlook email traffic. Now, they are both Office 365, but the Velocloud Edge device can differentiate between this. And the Teams traffic will be placed in something called as mission critical and also not fault tolerant, whereas the email traffic will be placed in something called business critical but transactional. Now, the ability to make this kind of decision is what makes Velocloud very different from all the vendors out there when it comes to WAN. We are simplifying this for customers. Now, the last part goes back to the simplicity of management. So we have an orchestrator that is in the cloud, and the orchestrator is the only way to manage the edge devices. The edge devices themselves, there is no way to access them. There's no CLI. They only have they only have an access via the orchestrator. And the orchestrator and the edge devices only communicate in the control plane. This is a truly software-defined solution, which means that none of the customer traffic will ever go to the orchestrator. And there's no point to send that traffic either. And to the extent that if we turn on the PCI compliance, for example, that traffic will not even leave logs that others can read. Not even the Velocloud support teams can read those logs of PCI compliant traffic. So this is a hugely differentiated, a true software-defined WAN solution. And of course, the orchestrator brings an enormous amount of analytics. Now we are adding more and more capability to the analytics that will go beyond the WAN, and soon we will also have analytics about the LAN as well. In fact, one of the things that we can already do is not only look at how our internet links are performing and get reports based on that, we can also look at how applications are consuming bandwidth, and we can look at it, any which ways that we want, which helps us determine if we have planned for enough capacity, is there an anomaly in terms of the bandwidth usage, and all of this helps us, understand how the enterprise applications are performing. We can also look at how users are consuming the applications as well. Now, this is an unprecedented level of visibility that, and analytics that we are bringing into the WAN and even to some extent the LAN space. Now, the dynamic multipath optimization is what really powers the Velocloud. In this particular example, like I mentioned before, internet connection 1 and 2, they're having brownout issues. They're facing different types of issues at different times. And as you can see, once we have used Velocloud for both these links, their capacity is combined, and we don't see latency jitter or packet loss in those situations. Now, this happens because of three things that we do. We monitor the links continuously. The edge devices will collect information and understand the health of that particular link. And this happens for every link, and this happens in real time, and it happens automatically. And if we have multiple links, we are able to steer the traffic on a per packet basis, unlike the other vendors who have to send all packets in one session through a particular link. We don't have that with Velocloud. And finally, the on-demand remediation. Like I mentioned before, when we start to see problems in each link, the edge device can automatically make decisions to remediate that. And this happens, like I mentioned, on real time. There is no more failover. There is no more manual intervention necessary when the WAN links start to deteriorate. Now, in terms of the components, it is extremely simple. Like I mentioned before, there is an orchestrator. There are edge devices in the branch and in the data center. And the edge devices are extremely important. And we need all sites. Wherever we have workloads, we need to have an edge device, right? In the exception of SaaS. And I will discuss that in a second. So in the data center, we are just going to put a bigger box. And in the branches, depending on how much bandwidth they need, typically we'll put a smaller box. But the hardware itself is not a big deal. It's not what determines the solution. It is the bandwidth that it utilizes. So there are two components in a Velocloud BOQ that you will see. One is the hardware itself, or in some cases we will completely not have hardware. For example, if it is AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, in those situations there's no hardware. And in some cases, in terms of co-location data centers, customers will ask us for a virtual appliance, and we can do that. In those cases, you only have the subscription component in the BOQ. Now, one thing that stands out here is the Velocloud gateways. The Velocloud gateway provides an all-important link in places that customers typically don't have reach. Like I mentioned before, the Velocloud gateways are deployed in all POPs, all internet POPs, wherever the location in the world, wherever there are ISPs. Now, this is maintained by Velocloud themselves or through Velocloud partners who have expertise in maintaining these gateways. Now, these gateways provide a point in the internet where the edge devices can connect to and make sure that the path that all the traffic takes in the middle of the internet is the most optimum path that is available to them. And this is what makes Velocloud a different solution than all the other providers out there. So I also wanted to discuss, what sort of customers are we talking to? Cloud adopters. A lot of companies moving from on-prem or private cloud to a hybrid cloud model. They are extremely important to us, and I think Velocloud really solves a huge problem for them. And in fact, in a number of cases, we have seen customers come back to us and you know um, look at Velocloud as an option. So in case you are talking to a customer who is migrating to the cloud, we can do a POC. I think that is the best way to approach it, because then you can see, then you can showcase the benefits of having an SD-WAN, Velocloud SD-WAN solution. Another scenario is that when organizations and enterprises change their applications, and this happens all the time. For example, one of our customers, Mafcal4, they moved their consumer loyalty program application recently, and the fact that it coincides with their adoption of Velocloud is it's not by accident. This is how it was designed, and the reason being, now that particular application is delivered with a combination of things, and it requires connectivity between the cloud, as well as it requires some of the services that are delivered from their DC. CPE upgrades, ISRs, Juniper SRX, Fortinet, whenever they come up for upgrades, either end of life or end of support. I think that would be a good place to start. Now, we do have an option with Velocloud to have the next generation firewall features also part of the same device. I will not go into it right now, but if you have a customer who is looking at the CPE upgrade, I recommend, please let me know, and I will give you all the options that we have in that space, and we can have that conversation with that customer. Customers who have not adopted any WAN strategy before, but they want to, in light of migrating to the cloud. For example, in Qatar, there is a widespread adoption of cloud happening right now, and this will be adopting SD-WAN would be a huge step, in a painless migration from completely on-prem to public cloud or hybrid cloud as well. And of course, for WAN contract renewal, we have a customer here who has moved away from depending on MPLS when it expired earlier this year, and have adopted the adopted SD-WAN, and has saved an enormous amount of cost when it comes to MPLS connectivity. And that is of course another opportunity for us to go and discuss SD-WAN. Retail is extremely important for us. Retail is probably one of those major customer base for SD-WAN, and again, like I mentioned, this is a solution that solves a major pain point for them. And the fact that like the apps that we discussed before, the nature of retail has changed. You may have noticed when you see how chain retail has changed from the kind of infrastructure they used to have to the kind of new infrastructure where they need more personalized engagement for their business to succeed with their consumers. And SD-WAN is something that can definitely solve major problems that they face today when it comes to connectivity. Financial and healthcare, and again, financial and healthcare, even though they are different, there is one common thread between them. It is also about how they engage with their customers. Now, both finance and healthcare requires a lot of personal consultation, and this increases the requirement of these organizations to be able to interact one-on-one, and they need to scale these consultations, beyond the traditional ways. And especially in the time of the pandemic, healthcare is under immense pressure to deliver more and more services. In fact, a lot in a large number of countries today, there is a lot of consultations happening remotely. And for both of these verticals, we have tailor-made solutions. And of course, both of these also have stringent compliance requirements. And apart from solving their connectivity problem, we can also provide that compliance and segmentation that they require, and we can do that quite easily as well. And this is another major point that we can make when it comes to talking to financial and healthcare customers. Now, another point that I want to make, and I'm about to in the last few slides, is the fact that we can also insert a lot of security services without having to redo the policies. There is no duplication, which means that if you have a customer who is using Zscaler, or if they are using Checkpoint, for example, we can integrate it in whichever way the customer wants. And all it takes to integrate that with the WAN is to enable that service, which is a check mark in the orchestrator, and pointing that to the IP that these service companies gives us. And once that is done, whatever policy is defined will be imported into the edge devices, and it is enforced. There is no additional configuration required from our side or redefine the policies. We make it extremely easy to integrate all of these ecosystem services, as I would like to call it, into SD-WAN. So the key takeaways for today are: number one, with Velocloud, we are able to simplify WAN and increase the visibility. And when I say increase the visibility, we are not just talking about the visibility into connectivity. We are also talking about visibility into application usage, bandwidth usage per application, and how that impacts the business. So, this has never been done before. So this is one key differentiator for Velocloud. The second is the DMPO. Like I mentioned, that is a key differentiator because it solves a number of problems. We are making internet connectivity more and more reliable using DMPO. And with DMPO in place, voice and video, interactive video traffic is going to be as reliable as going through a public circuit like broadband as it would be with a private line. Managed on-ramp to the cloud. The third key takeaway is the fact that when customers are thinking of adopting cloud services, whether it be infrastructure as a service or software as a service and everything in between, adopting Velocloud SD-WAN is the first step towards a painless migration to the cloud. So these are the three things that I think appeals to a lot of enterprises today. And if you have customers interested in SD-WAN, I'm more than happy to work with you on these opportunities. More than happy to come and talk to the customers on your behalf as well, and also manage this with VMware on the other side. Okay, I will check if you have any questions. Thank you so much. And any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, and we will come back to you.